Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of BIM Pure Live. I am your host, Nicolas Catalier. I am an architect, a BIM specialist, and the founder of Revit Pure and BIM Pure. We have a very special guest today. We're going to talk about Forma and about sustainability using BIM tools. Before moving on with that, a couple of things to mention. First, as usual, if you're watching live today, April 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, you can type in the chat where you're watching from. Always good to know. Else, this is bimpure.com. This is our membership website that we've launched a couple of months ago. That includes all the courses we've originally released under the Revit Pure name, which has all evolved into BIM Pure. That includes Revit courses, basics, design, manage, inherit families, downloadable files, template, family collection, Dynamo scripts, session with experts, live master classes, and more. And last week we had Nehama come live to talk about excavation in Revit, but she also mentioned the new course that she did in collaboration with us at BIM Pure, which is called BIM for Landscape 101. So this is a short 28 minutes course about everything you need to know if you want to get started with BIM, if you're a landscape architect, or if you are a BIM specialist and you want to learn more about landscape. Both of these scenarios are good for you. That's at bimpure.com/landscape, and we have a sale that actually ends today. So to get the course, you have to get the entire membership. You will get everything included on BIM Pure, all the content, and including this mini course about landscape. And we've recently released a new page. This is bimpure.com/membership. So if you're curious, if you get BIM Pure, what is actually inside, this is the page you'll be forwarded to once you join in. And you can see all the content included and the orientation where you get access to the community, all the courses, the live events. And if you scroll down, you can see everything included. And you get all the replays from past live sessions exclusive to the members and also upcoming live masterclass. So we've just announced a new one, and it's going to be called Powerful Revit Door Families. And it's about developing a great collection of Revit doors, and it will be launched at the same time as the BIM Pure Doors Library. So that is on May 27th. That's a live event exclusive to subscribers. So learn more at bimpure.com, or there's a discount if you go at bimpure.com/landscape. All right, where are people watching from? Got people from the US, Bird from Huntington Beach, Liz from Greater Boston, someone from Singapore, Spokane, Washington, Knoxville, Tennessee, someone from Mexico, someone from Halifax, Tom from Central Texas. Okay, so today's guest is Dan Stine. Dan is currently based in San Antonio, Texas, although he is originally from Minnesota. He's the director of design technology at Lake Flato Architects. He has been since 2020. He's also an author. He has written lots of books, lots of Revit books since 2002. And his Revit books are #1 in the US markets. He also writes blog posts for Enscape. He serves on the National AIA Committee on the Environment Leadership Group. And he also blogs at BIM Chapters. So let me bring in Dan. How are you doing?
Hey, Nicholas. I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Nice to see you. So it's your first time on the show.
Yeah, excited.
Yeah, so you used to live in Minnesota. So we're chatting before the show that actually here in Quebec, we've got snow today. My lawn is covered in snow, pretty awful. So you must feel great for having a nice weather today, right?
Yeah, I totally get snowbirds now because a nice winter here is like a nice winter in northern, or a nice summer in northern Minnesota.
Yeah, so you moved in 2020 to Texas to work for
Yeah, yeah,
Lake Flato. And what is your role at this
yeah.
firm?
So director of design title, or director of design technology, as you mentioned, is my title. I also lead our research program and am involved and active in our design performance group. So do lots of things, wear lots of hats, really fun, lots of cool projects all over the country and different project types.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about everything like about Forma and all of that. But what is the difference between being a BIM manager, a director of design technology? Director of design technology is a bit more vast. I guess you play with more tools, like some of them related to sustainability, like we're going to talk about
Yeah,
today.
yeah, there are some pretty good distinctions. At my previous firm, that was a 300, almost 300 person multidiscipline firm. I was also the BIM manager, so it was like everything, fire drill every day. At Lake Flato, we have a BIM manager who's amazing. He actually worked at Revit before Autodesk acquired Revit, and then combined there and at Autodesk on Revit product development for 17 years. Stephen Campbell. So he basically oversees the development of our Revit template and content, and he's also an expert in materials and visualization. So he creates some really cool custom Enscape assets. We'll buy something from Turbo Squid, or we'll use Polycam to scan people or objects in the office, and he'll decimate them in Blender and create like really high quality real-time render ready, not too heavy assets that we can use on really big projects.
Nice. So you've got a giveaway. So as we mentioned before, I think we should. There's two parts. The first, let me share your screen because it's on there. So we have the 3D Connection keyboards. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, it's sort of just kind of fell into my lap. It was a unique opportunity. I was talking to my friends over at 3D Connection, and they're like, "Hey, you want to give away some keyboards?" And then this was a few months ago. I said, "Sure." I didn't quite know how I was going to do it, and then we talked about me being on your show, so I'm like, "Hey, let's do it on your show because you have the ability to give stuff away with your setup." So, anyways, as it turns out, here's a picture of my desk, and I have the keyboard and the CAD mouse and the space mouse, and I've used the CAD mouse and the space mouse for years, bought them myself. The space mouse is awesome for navigating through Enscape. The CAD mouse is just a good solid mouse, and it actually has a special little button on it right below the wheel. And then these buttons across the top of the keyboard also have some special preset functions when it detects that the current application is Revit or SketchUp or a browser or even Word. And so there's this little floating toolbar that you can see if you go to this QR code or this URL, which they actually didn't ask me to do anything like promote anything. They're just like, "You want to give away 5 keyboards?" And I'm like, "Sure." But since I use their stuff and happy with it, I figured I might as well make this little video showing how what the value is to these AEC specific input devices. So there's this little floating toolbar, and you can see how they have the keys grouped in groupings of 4. And so that little toolbar has little icons for like the align command or some specific Revit command, and you can change what they are. But if you wanted the text command, maybe it's the second to the last key in the center grouping. So, just with that visual clue that there's 4 keys, right? I'm guessing they did a little research on how to group these and not have too many or too few. And then on the keyboard or on the mouse, you can push this button, and other programs have something like this, but a little radial menu shows up at your cursor. And then if you're in Revit, there's some Revit commands like undo or zoom extents or zoom to fit. You just move your cursor out through that particular command without clicking or anything, and then it initiates that command. And those default options can also be changed, but just a kind of a cool collection of stuff. The mouse has a USB dongle, but it's also Bluetooth, and it can also be plugged in. It's got a built-in rechargeable battery, but if it's dead and you just use the charging cable to plug it into the computer, and now it's a wired mouse. So the little I don't know, have you used the space mouse before?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's super unique because it's like this is it. It's like it's really heavy and it's meant to be for your non-dominant hand. And you can move in four ways at one time. So you're basically pushing this thing away from you to start moving forward in Enscape. This actually also works in Revit, just not as smooth because Revit's a little heavier. You know, it's not meant for being a purely visualization thing, but you push it away from you to move forward, lift it to elevate in the space, twist it, and you're just like I'm already twisting it the full amount right there. And you can see it's hardly even moving. So again, it doesn't move, the bottom doesn't move at all. So you can push, lift, twist, and tilt, and basically like go under and around a chair leg or some piece of architecture that you want to look at really closely. And you're doing all that with your left single hand, while your other hand's still using your normal mouse right clicks and scroll wheel stuff.
Nice. So you've got 5 of them to give away, but it's they only ship to North America. So you
Yeah,
told me that does include Canada and Mexico. So
yeah,
sadly
that's North
for our
America.
Asian or European friends or people elsewhere in the world, doesn't work. But we have something else at the end of the show,
That's for
license for
everybody.
Verus. Yeah, so
Yeah, here,
that's going to be at the end. But now we have 5 of these to give away,
yeah.
and let's just give
And
me
the
open. Yeah.
keyboard is wired, but then there's this super unique, haven't seen this, maybe it exists somewhere, but it's like a detached wireless number pad. So if you're left-handed or right-handed, you move it wherever you want or move it out of the way if you don't use it most of the time. It's kind of cool. It's just got a little, also doesn't take batteries. It just recharges with this USB-C connection. But the
Uh, uh,
keyboard itself is wired, like you can see in the picture there.
all right, so I'm gonna start a giveaway. Again, this is only if you are in North America. We've got something else later if you are elsewhere in the world. And to participate, so let me just start a giveaway. Okay, so to participate, type in the chat if you're watching live again, !raffle, just like this, like you're seeing on the screen right now. And yeah, you will get in the giveaway. And after 5 minutes, we're gonna pick 5 people to get in. And if you win, you got to send an email to nick@bimpure.com and make sure to include your contact information, address, and I'll make sure to forward that to Dan so we can send you that gear. So make sure you are in North America, please, and because if you don't, we won't be able to ship. Okay, so it's gonna go for 5 minutes then. So meanwhile, while that's going on, I'm gonna move so we can see your screen. So if yeah, like I'll let you go and talk a little bit about why you
Yeah.
started using Forma and what you think about it.
Yeah, I have a couple of really quick intro slides. And I don't know if you saw this, but just 5 hours ago now, Amy Bunzel, she's the executive VP at Autodesk. She posted what did she call it? A connectivity engagement between Autodesk and Nemetschek. They're going to start working together on enhancing interoperability, which is really interesting. It actually gets into some of the things that are particularly cool about Forma, with them opening up this to be more of a platform that third parties can do stuff on, like TestFit and Verus, the AI generative AI tool, and even AutoCAD 2025. You know, AutoCAD for a while has had the option to like show the aerial imagery from like Google Maps or wherever it gets the image from. But now in AutoCAD 2025, there's actually some data from Esri that can be layered onto the map background, which is super cool, just in plain AutoCAD, not Civil 3D.
Yeah, I saw
So
that the thing about uh, Nemetschek from the compatibility
yeah,
with
be interesting to see
ArchiCAD.
what happens
I didn't see all
happens
the
with that.
details, but that's always a good thing if you're not
Yeah.
locked in software and can communicate more easily with others.
So you already mentioned all this stuff, but I will just point out my winter garb for my year-round annual bike commute that I used to do down to minus 20 degrees. And then really quickly, for those of you who might not have heard of Lake Flato, 150 people, 2019 Architect magazine ranked us the #1 firm in the US. We've won more of the AIA top 10 sustainability awards than any other firm in the US. About half of our work is national. Right now we have projects in Fiji and Hawaii and the Caribbean, Montana and California, a project at Cornell and at UPenn. And this, yeah, you already mentioned my blog, BIM chapters. And then just one other last thing that's kind of interesting and which ties into Forma. I have a video series that I created on Forma. Autodesk actually sponsored it, i.e. they paid me to make it, which is, you can see via this QR code. And then another thing I'll touch on briefly in this presentation is shared coordinates. And I know you've talked about that as well on your show.
Yeah.
I made a series of videos on shared coordinates that I think are pretty good. Get to the point that people need to know. So Forma. Actually, I'm going to sort of start backwards and talk about some really show and talk about some really cool things to make sure I don't run out of time to show some of the flashy stuff. So at Lake Flato, we've been using Forma now. Actually, almost a year. We used it as SpaceMaker before it was even available in the US. We had some special access to it, and actually, there's some cool features in there that sort of went away, like sort of like a Isovist kind of tool where you could. We were working on this one island project, and you could project a heat map onto the building of what parts of the facade had views of the ocean, and wherever the views were blocked by an adjacent building, it was sort of like heat map for daylight availability, but related to views. Hopefully some of those tools will come back. But anyways, this is a project in Austin, Texas that we're currently working on. This is all SketchUp geometry. So most of what we've done hasn't been modeling directly in Forma, but all the tools, the way we used to do CFD wind analysis using Eddy 3D as a Grasshopper script or SimScale or some of the other analyses that are in here were just more time consuming or cost more. I mean, now that if you have AEC collections, you have access to Forma for free. And then there's some other analyses I'll show you when we get to the next model that, like traffic noise analysis that we just really never did much of. And now that it's so easy, we've been actually doing it quite a bit and even using it in presentations to clients and interviews. So this is a CFD wind analysis, and later I'll show you the AI version that happens before this that actually is super interesting. But there is a way, as I'll show in a minute, where you can see the wind streams, but really those aren't necessary. They just look really cool. What's most helpful right now is the comfort scale. It's basically an academic approach to understanding when it's comfortable, as you see the scale across the bottom, to sit, stand, stroll, walk, or it's just always going to be uncomfortable if you're outside and it's in the red. So if we're developing a space for outdoor dining on the ground, or even just any outdoor programming, which we can do quite a bit in the Southwest and on the West Coast, right? Because of the climate year round has more opportunities for that. We can see that, but like I mentioned, you can switch here to direction, and then on the windrows up here, you can pick the direction that's most prevalent for this particular site. And then there's an option to turn on the streamlines, which is pretty cool. And if you switch the wind direction, you can see, and if you're not oriented very well here, you could turn on this giant arrow, which puts itself in kind of weird spot. I don't think you can move this, but if I switch it, see how the arrow is pointing the other way. And then you can also expand this little streamlines thing and switch it from importance to height variation. So you can actually or by height, where you can specify the height. So right now it's at 12 meters, but if we were particularly interested in a outdoor dining or a plaza at grade, we could switch it to this and then move it down to, something like 6 to 10 feet.
I do have a question for you. So you mentioned that the kind of the main buildings have been modeled in SketchUp. What about the site
Yeah.
context? Was that automatically modeled from like the maps from Forma? Like I've played a bit with
Yeah,
it,
good
and
good question. Yeah, once I get past the show and tell here, I'm gonna start a project from scratch, and you'll
okay,
see
cool.
that all the models and the accurate, relatively accurate topography are all automatically generated.
Okay, let's before you move on, we do have the winners. So let me
Cool,
just
cool.
share my screen. So congratulations to Todd McBride, Steve Goodmanson, Brian Becca, Tarcisius Minushan, and Tracy Garner. So I hope that you are all in North America. If so, send an email at nick@bimpier.com and make sure to include your contact information, so shipping address basically. So again, please send an email during the show. I'll just keep an eye to make sure I receive all the info, or can type in the chat that you confirm that you've acknowledged that you've won and to claim your prize. If we don't hear from you, we might pick somebody else, or if we don't have North America shipping address. So congrats to all 5 of these people, and we'll have another giveaway for Veras at the end of the show. Moving back to you.
All right. So my screen's back live
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah.
All right, cool. One last thing I'll show here really quick is there's this inspect tool. In most of these analyses views, you can click inspect and then drop in these little tags. So it's kind of cool. It tells you, the comfort level would be walking or higher, which in this case there's nothing higher. This one's standing, and then if you pick in a green spot or a light green spot, it's sitting. So there's a pretty small spot there for sitting. So I'm going to move on to another one real quick because there's lots to show, and it's kind of cool to start from scratch and just appreciate how quick and easy this is to do. So this is another fairly large development project that we're working on. And when you're doing CFD wind analysis, there's some specifics related to vegetation. So you have to use Forma's rather ugly looking, but practical and functional trees because they have the ability to filter the wind at an appropriate 20% or whatever it is. Um, and so here's another large development project, and we did a lot of wind analysis on this as well. You can see it's along a river, it's along a really busy road. But what's particularly cool about this one is we did some traffic noise analysis. This is one of those things I mentioned we didn't used to do very often, but now that we have access to this tool that's um, just completely democratizes it, we've been doing it a lot. And what's cool about it is it allows you to take and move some massing around. You can create different proposals and move these blocks around and run the analysis and then compare them in these side by side views. And here we put some like commercial non-residential blocks here in the foreground on this really busy road. And just beyond that, you can see, again, based on this, and right now it's showing decibels. You can see the decibel levels are in the green. And once you get past this first block of buildings, and so that makes these residential blocks a lot more comfortable to be in and around. And there's some really cool steps, and required steps, important steps to make sure that you have the correct information associated with the roads. I'm going to get into that once I start a new project here in just a minute. One other interesting thing, if any of you are involved in building performance, like well building, for example, we just are in the process of finalizing our certification for well building for our new office that we remodeled. And one of the requirements, because we have this outdoor courtyard, is to do a calculation on outdoor thermal comfort. And we used the Forma results in the final report for that. So that's cool. You can see both that previous project and this one as well. We have our landscape architects, really cool drawing brought in and mapped in place so that
Yeah,
it
how
gives,
is that? Is that an image or it's
yep, it's just an image of
okay.
what they would have done in InDesign or Illustrator or AutoCAD. You know, we work with lots of different landscape architects, and um, all of those options can end up as a JPEG or a PNG file. And then there's just a simple import option here where you can bring in OBJ, IFC, DXF, raster up to 100 megabyte file size. So I'm going to start a new project really quick and go through like the process. So you basically just type where you are in the world. San Antonio, Texas, the seventh largest city in the United States, right here.
So that's where we live.
Yep. And this is within this area, not by accident, is our office location that I'll point out once this is done. But right now, it's already creating the terrain for that area that was selected. There is a maximum size that you can select, but as you'll see, it's quite generous. And there'll be a couple of little slow spots here, but it's still worth just pointing out, starting from absolute scratch.
Yeah,
So
yeah, maybe while that's loading, while it's already finished. But this is available to anyone with the AEC collection, right? So if you have
there's,
Revit, in theory, you do have access to it.
yeah, not if you just have the plain Revit license, which about
Yeah.
3/4 of our seats are just plain Revit, and
Oh,
about a
really?
quarter
Okay.
of them are AEC collections.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have quite a few seats of it, and
Yeah, with the
that's
AEC
that's
collection.
yeah, that's also where we need AutoCAD. So not everybody at Lake Flato has access to AutoCAD on a daily basis, which
Mm-hmm.
actually isn't that big a deal. We've never used AutoCAD technically before Revit. The company used this software called Eris, which I had never heard of before.
Really? Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know about it.
yeah, me either. And then we switched from Eris to Revit, but we still need AutoCAD to open up, you know, files from surveyors and things like that. So I just downloaded the building. There's actually three options, and they're all LOD1. They're just coming from different sources, but you know, they're still almost all simple extrusions. They're not really amazing looking representative buildings, but in terms of blocking shadow or blocking the sun and creating shade and shadow and blocking solar heat gain and things like that, that's accurate, quite accurate for that. It already automatically brought in the terrain, but you can switch to this Esri option or just make it a flat terrain if you don't want it to include the slope of the ground. Well, I just usually stick with the one that it did by default, which is this USGS one. Yeah, yeah. Well, I've clicked on the buildings, so I clicked on Open City, and I've spent time in the past comparing all three of these, and the FEMA one, although here it looks more detailed, I think it's been less detailed more often than not, but you can download all of these and you can see they all say free, so it doesn't hurt to download them all and just compare them for whatever your project site is. Of course, if there's people watching that have some input on this, like they know more about what one of these is and the, you know, where the data comes from. I don't want to act like a know-it-all. If somebody else has some info to share, happy to hear it. And then so the open street maps, as you can see in the background, in fact, I'm going to close this just for a second. So right now we have the topography that's actually has some grade, you know, the grade is accurate, but there's no buildings in it. There looks like there's roads, but the data, for example, that you need to do the traffic noise analysis isn't here yet. So I'm going to, on the left here, there's this library, and here are the buildings that I've downloaded. But before I add those, I'm going to download the rest of the stuff. So I clicked on order data, and then I'm going to click on OpenStreetMap, the free button, and then it selects the area. I'll hit order. And then I think before this became Forma, there was some cost associated with some of these, and maybe as other options start to populate with third parties, maybe there will be some cost involved, but everything here, you can see it's all free. And then there's the property lines. This one actually is the most limiting. I'm going to move this right around in here because this is where my project that my little fictitious project is going to be. If you try and make it bigger, it'll give you an error and the order button grays out. But these are the property lines, like the legal boundary descriptions. And then actually, if you click on the import button here, you can browse for a Revit OBJ file, for example. I'm not going to do that just yet. Well, any OBJ file. So there's no direct RVT import or SKP or 3DM. From those applications, you export an OBJ file, and you obviously want to optimize them, not have walls and furniture and stuff in them. But the file that I'll bring in a little bit later actually has sunshades that are fairly detailed on the outside of the building. And traditionally, when you do CFD wind analysis, you can't have any of that stuff. It has to be super, super simple.
Yeah, so
All right.
something quickly, I think some people mentioned they didn't hear me. It's I did mute myself on the stream and forget to unmute. So that's
Hmm.
fixed now.
Okay.
When I ask about the AC, some people ask if I did ask you if the form is included in the Autodesk AC collection, and that's
Right.
right.
Yeah. Yep.
And I did run a poll on the live chat, like asking if people have used Autodesk Forma so far. Like, and we are having 64% no at the moment. So I was
Okay.
just curious to see how many people have used it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, it's happy to share something new and not just share something that everybody already knows about. But like I said, the fun thing about people who do know about it, they can share some tips and tricks in the chat as well. But yeah, Forma is included if you have AEC collection, and it's also available for students that have .edu emails and are already able to access like student copies of Revit and AutoCAD, which is really cool. So really quick, there's these tabs on the left here, and I'm on the main tab that has the project name, which it just did an address of wherever my cursor happened to be, or the project pinpoint. But I can click up here and change this to anything I want it to be. And then right now there's just one proposal. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But down here, notice where it says layers. This is like Adobe Photoshop layers or AutoCAD layers. It's the ability to turn things on and off. And so the terrain, right, is basically the only thing that's in here right now. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because as I add those buildings and the roads, um, and other things, they'll start to show up here as extra layers, and you can control all of them separately, which is the main point that I want to make. So now that those things are sort of ordered and downloaded, they're here rather than up in this button where we originally saw them. So if I click on buildings, I clicked on preview, and so I can get a sense of, oh, this looks like what I was expecting. So I'm going to go ahead and add it. There's a button there at the top to add this context to my model. And again, you can see it's a giant area that it brought in. So then there's also the road information. So well, if I go back for a second, notice how there's this buildings now that can be turned on and off. And later I'll show you how you can remove a building, like you're going to demolish a building or one's already been demolished. It's
Do,
not
do,
there anymore.
do you know if this is like this looks pretty good? Do you know how accurate it is all around the world? I know I tried some places in Canada and it was apparently not as good as the data in the US.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the open source data that is provided by a lot of municipalities. Like I remember seeing some examples back in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, where I'm originally from, and think it's St. Paul is like super progressive with their uh, the data that they plug into their GIS open source system. So you can get some really nice, accurate looking buildings. And that was when I was playing around more with InfoWorks. But yeah, so anyways, the buildings can be turned on and off, and feel free to keep interjecting. I'm gonna just keep rambling so I don't so I
Well,
get through a lot of this data.
there's a couple of questions. Maybe we can take them. Then I'll let you run with some of the features. Like there's
Okay.
someone asking is a format the format replacement. So I think there's probably a confusion between the two. I think format is like this kind of simile SketchUp that Autodesk created, but it's being discontinued. At least they won't support it anymore. But totally different beast from the Forma, right?
Yeah, well, so I don't actually have any insight on that. Sometimes I know stuff that I can't say. I actually don't know this, but that
Yeah.
was my first thought when I saw that Format was going into maintenance mode, and perhaps they're going to switch all their energy here and do all the Format stuff in Forma. I mean, it's
Conceptual modeling. Yeah, maybe.
yeah. There are some already a lot of the I think the workflows are built in here. This ability to do these generic volumes, which actually has the ability to do subtractions and sweeps and even round off corners. And then this 3D sketch where you can start to manipulate building masses. So I don't know for sure, but it seems like a plausible uh,
And
scenario.
and another question from Liz Sinclair: how do users like using Forma compared to Rhino? This is what people I've worked with default for doing for massing and context models. So does it do a similar job to what Rhino does?
Yeah, so I hadn't mentioned this, but in my Format video series, there's one episode where I show multiple ways of getting geometry into Revit or into Format. So at Lake Flato, we use Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, and we've brought all of that stuff into Forma. And in fact, out of all of those three things, we just mentioned earlier the Autodesk working with Esri and Nemeshek now. Well, Autodesk made an add-in for Rhino that's a Forma connector. And when you open up, I don't actually have Rhino on this computer, so I can't show that. But when you install the Forma connector in Rhino, you open Rhino, you click on the Forma connector, and it actually connects to the open Forma project that you have open in your browser, and you hit um, there's like a push-pull situation, and when you click pull, it actually creates all of this context that you see here in Rhino, and it'll also make um, some layers in Rhino that align with these functions. So any extrusions you make on the residential layer in Rhino gets pulled back when you do the push button. It pushes it back into Forma, and um, the areas are actually tracked, which you can't do that with SketchUp or Revit models. Only Rhino models can actually come in as almost completely legit native Forma geometry.
All right. So I'll let you keep going. And actually, we have a question that relates to what you were showing. Someone asked if you can remove a single building. So you said you
Yep.
can, right?
Yep. We're going to do that in a minute.
All right.
So notice that there's no roads listed here. So when I click on roads, I'll see these lines show up, and it's this just like the temporary preview of the buildings. I'm seeing where the roads are going to be. So I'm going to click add, and now I come back here and roads show up. And there were roads there, but now there's roads with the ability to hold traffic information, particularly speed limit and average daily traffic numbers that are necessary to do an accurate projection of traffic noise onto surfaces and adjacent buildings. And then the last one is the property lines. So if I click on this, this was a much smaller area, if you remember. So the property lines are listed there, and I'm going to add them. And now, before I do anything else, interestingly enough, um, I'm going to actually show you, well, two things. First thing, like what we would do on a typical Lake Flato project is we always do a microclimate analysis of a project before Forma ever existed. And some of those same things that we did, Forma now sort of does automatically. We still have some other things that we would do, but there's like basically the ability to pick like the area that you're considering and set the size of the radius. It only goes so big, but it's a lot bigger than it used to be. Like it used to not get as big as some of our urban planning projects. And we've had a lot of great meetings with the Forma developers, and they've been super responsive and super interested in our workflows. So great. The main point there is to, you know, try and get involved, especially with like the Autodesk beta stuff. There's lots of opportunities to help influence product development and things like that. So anyways, I clicked run analysis here, and now I can go on and do other stuff. It's all happening in the cloud, so I don't have to wait for that to finish. But I'm going to quickly jump over and start a brand new Revit project using the default out of the box Revit template. And one thing that's really important, notice I have a BIM Pure shortcut here. I'm going to save this really quickly, and then I'm going to link in my civil CAD file. This isn't like the fully accurate way of doing this, but here's a CAD file, and that circle and that little those two lines right at the center of that circle and that intersection is the 00 of the CAD file, right? So if I select this CAD file and go to shared coordinates and acquire, which is the only way that I recommend doing it because publish doesn't work in BIM 360. So if you just always do it the same way with the acquire workflow that I share in my videos, it works really well. But a lot of people don't quite realize there's like a lot of mystery to shared coordinates. And technically it only does two things, and in reality it only does one thing. And actually I'm going to cancel that because I forgot I need to turn on the survey point. And I'm going to turn on all of these: survey point, project base point, internal origin. So they're all over here. This whole shared coordinates thing, when you hit acquire, all of this does is moves the shared coordinate point to the 00 of the CAD file. And then if you export your Revit file with shared coordinates, it makes the DWG file have the same 00. So Civil can link in your CAD file or your Revit file generated as a DWG in the correct spot, for example. That actually works really well. And then the second thing that it does, if you have links, is it just makes all the shared coordinate or the survey points attached to each other. So if I were to grab this point and drag it, it's going to move all the links that same amount if they were all linked via shared coordinate. Anyways, the main reason that I wanted to show this is because when you install the Forma connector, so here's and it's in an unusual spot. It's not on the add-ins like you would expect. It's under massing in site, and you click load proposal. And it's going to say that it can't find one because I haven't done the thing yet. And this is just to point out the fact that this is kind of temporary. You have to on this proposal because it's specific to a proposal. I'm going to go to send to Revit. And then now that I've done that, I can click on load proposal, and it's going to find one because it's sitting in some temporary location. I guess it just always puts it in the same spot because you can only have one at a time. There are some bunch of options here, and I actually turned off the option, and I haven't even created any like new proposed geometry yet anyways. But with this turned off, it would just create massing and mass floors. But right now, the interesting thing to note is that it's going to create the context model in Revit that I could just ignore Forma now. Maybe I don't care about anything else. Maybe you don't care about anything else I'm about to show after this. But this is a quick, easy way to get a giant context doesn't even have to be giant. It could be a couple blocks worth into Revit to start doing some other design analysis.
Yeah, so in theory, even if you don't care about like wind, solar, you can still
Hmm.
model your site context, do it in
Yeah,
Forma
because
and bring it to Revit.
there's also going to be a really nice aerial image already mapped to the actual irregular topography, which will actually also be a topo solid in a couple seconds here. And right away, the first thing you could do then is click the unlink proposal button right here if you wanted to just not have it be connected anymore. Now it's only one time from the context stuff from Forma to Revit, but you can push Revit modeled stuff back a bunch of times if you want. I think for lack of time or for time's sake, I'm going to skip pushing anything back to Revit right now because you could use the Revit massing tool, add mass floors, and then push that back. But obviously, we're already getting close to the top of the hour. So trust me, there's an aerial image and all the buildings are going to come in. I guess we could come back to that in a minute. But on our project site here, I might call this existing, and then I could duplicate this. And I'm going to call this, something like option A. And then for existing, I'm going to be on existing, and then I'm going to come down here and tell it any of the context stuff unless you get into edit mode, because that's all supposed to be background stuff that doesn't change. Well, I might want this building. I'm going to, maybe this building's been demolished or it needs to be demolished. Or in San Antonio, which is the largest city with a deconstruction policy, if this was a 1 to 4 family home, it's not allowed to be demolished. It has to be deconstructed, and the materials go into the circular economy. But I can select this building, right click, move to proposal. And so it moved it to the proposal that I'm in. And now if I switch to this one, you can see it's gone. So if I duplicate option A and make a B, that will still be gone. And then over here, well, and actually, so I'm going to keep moving because I have a lot to cover and we're running out of time. So there's site limits. And because we brought in the property line information, um, we can quickly create an area based on the property line data. So that's our site area. And this is still super preliminary and I mean, not particularly useful, I think, for a lot of people yet, but it's still fun to show. And actually, I'm going to make a duplicate option B, and I won't even rename it, but there's this first little option up here called Explore. And if I click this site area and click this little magic wand, Forma is using generative AI to, hold on, maybe I have to click it. There we go. So it actually is giving me all these options across the bottom. I mean, I don't know what the program is for this, right? I don't know why it's deciding 4 stories and two, I'm guessing this is more residential, maybe small office complex or something, but that's still kind of fun. And I have, this is super beta, really new thing. So there's
Yeah,
a lot.
is this similar to what TestFit does, but in a
Yeah.
smaller scale
So,
somehow?
yep. Yep. TestFit has a lot of prereqs that you can plug in, like different types of units and things like that.
TestFit
There's
do have
also,
a Forma plugin or link for parking, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That over here in the extensions, you can bring in, there's a test fit, there's this embodied carbon one that I'm going to show, the Evolve Labs. This is what makes this really cool is that it's not just all Autodesk proprietary. Here's that Rhino extension. Um, so there's different ways of drawing buildings. There's actually this line option. I'm going to draw this over in this adjacent park. So you could draw something and you can then select it and specify over to the right here how many floors it is and the spacing between floors. There's also this thing, I've used it a couple times as an adjacent, there's like a development, uh, suburban development next to this middle school that we're working on, and it wasn't coming up. It was too new, so it wasn't coming up in the context here. So just drew a bunch of buildings to fill in next to it. But what we typically use is this basic building option, which then allows us to quickly draw the footprint of a building. You just basically pick your points for the outline. You can actually type in lengths, but obviously I'm just winging it here. There we go. So you can make this as tall as you want initially, but then once you're done, you select it and you can specify the number of floors and then the spacing between floors. And then while it's selected, you can notice how there's some gross floor area info here. You can also specify different functions. You can make additional functions, but these are the default residential and commercial. So if I pick commercial, you'll notice that commercial now has 862,000 square feet. And then from here, we can start to look at the sun hours, and there's a little description here of what it is. And we click analyze, and then I'll switch this to 6 months later, June 21st, and click analyze. So those two things are calculating. The wind analysis that we mentioned earlier, what you're about to see right now is an AI simulation. And if we were to start creating like breaker walls just to test like an outdoor dining area, as soon as we create this thing, the AI will update. It's sort of like Enscape. It's instant, but not really instant. And you can do this in real time, but then to do a more computationally accurate, CFD analysis, you can see it's going to take 55 to 165 minutes to do a full analysis, but that's all done in the cloud, not at your expense. The microclimate analysis we previously ran, or at least I thought I hit run, but I don't see it listed here. I'm going to hit run again. And then the noise analysis I mentioned, the thing that's important to know about this is if I click on roads over here on the left and then click on a road, sometimes this data will be there and sometimes it won't be. And actually I have to go into edit mode because this is some of the background information. But notice the speed limit. Let's say this is downtown, so maybe it's only 25 miles an hour. And then if this doesn't come in, which it often doesn't, you can go to many of the US DOT websites, like TxDOT is what we call it. And maybe there's 800 cars that drive on this road every day. And then around the corner, maybe this just to do something a little bit different. Maybe there's 2,200 cars and you can go 40 miles an hour on this road. And then when you do the click calculate, so it's going to take 5 to 20 minutes. So we'll see if it finishes. But you saw in the other example though, because there's only data for 2 roads, it'll only be projecting and from those 2 vectors. When we swing around the backside of the building, it'll just be blank because there's nothing there. And then, so I've already made a video about the carbon analysis tool. You have to click add extension, add embodied carbon. And this is a really new thing, so there's probably a lot of people who aren't familiar with it. But once you've added it, it shows up here, embodied carbon. This is using Embodied Architects C-scale engine. And there's a lot of data here that you can plug in. You can start with this high level what's the service life of the building, the envelope, the structure, and then you go down this list and specify what the program is of the building. And then that C scale is actually using machine learning and real world data. Here's the window to wall ratio, the the structure. So is this a mass timber? This is too tall, and at least in the US for a mass timber. So maybe it's hybrid concrete and steel. Um, and then you hit analyze, and this will give you a carbon CO2 per square foot equivalent. It's already done. And you can use this as a benchmark or a baseline to try and achieve hopefully something better than this because these are existing buildings. This even uses accurate carbon emissions for concrete that's accurate to the zip code of the project. And then the very last thing, and then we got that giveaway. So I'm going to just really, really quickly mention this. This is a new feature that hasn't even been announced yet. It's a board like Miro or Mural or Zoom, and you can drag and create these boards and bring the analysis. It can be live or static information. See the sun hours, and you can have it be based on specific camera views that you've previously saved. You can sketch on here, add post-it notes, double check this or try something different. And then you can present this to a client, which is super cool. You can bring in images. Maybe you have a rendering of a project. Here's the Lake Flato office remodel rendering for our own building. And the sketchy stuff is just super cool. I love the style of it.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Um, do you have a few more minutes? I
Clear.
know we're pretty much at the hour, but
Yeah, I have a little more time.
yeah, yeah, me too. So we're gonna go a bit over time. Um, let's take some questions. There's a question from Brett saying, looks like good planning use case for architects, but what about MEP consulting engineering firms? So are there features from MEP as well, or this is more for architects?
Yeah, I think I'm not aware of any specific MEP functionality here. Um, I see, with the ability for those extensions by third parties, there certainly could be some opportunities. I mean, the closest thing is the operational energy or operational carbon. This is essentially using a lot of the Autodesk Insight workflows, and it's a little bit more limiting here. So we still do all of that back in Revit, where it'll create the ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G perimeter and core thermal zoning. Um, this I don't believe does that, but it still is accurate for the R value and the thermal mass values of these selections. Still doing smartish stuff, but yeah, but I think mechanical engineers are using things a little more sophisticated than this.
Yeah, Denise says that wind could come in handy in MEP to calculate loss of heat or chill factors. There's
Yep. And this only works on exterior situations. It's not doing anything internal like displacement ventilation or
mhm.
natural ventilation inside a building.
There's a question from Travis asking how many versions back in Revit can you use the Forma link? So you showcase how to bring the Forma site contacts. Do you know
Mm,
how far which Revit version this goes to?
I'm not sure actually. Yeah, when you click to download, it just downloads one installer. So I guess uh, yeah, it probably says somewhere, but I don't know that answer.
No problem. What else do we have? Z Channel asks, are cloud credits required for any of this analysis?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no cloud credits, which is
That's
pretty
good to know.
amazing. When I
Hmm.
present on Autodesk Insight, which is doing a pretty complex DOE 2.2 analysis in the cloud on Amazon AWS servers. In case you didn't know, Autodesk doesn't own Amazon AWS servers, Amazon owns them. So there is a cost involved, right? Every time we do this really intense CFD wind analysis or a energy model, and it's not that I'm not trying to make it sound like Autodesk just giving anything away. I know Lake Flato spends a lot of money every year to the Autodesk account, but that's still a lot of people aren't taking advantage of it, I think is the main thing to understand.
Yeah. Of all the features that you've showcased, like what is it that Lake Flato uses the most Forma
Yeah,
for? Like, do you
I
use
mean,
all of it,
really,
or
we've
yeah,
been using almost all of it on
yeah,
almost every project.
really?
Obviously, if it's
Okay.
a remodel project or something, it's been really effective in our urban environment studio that are doing those big projects. But even on smaller projects, I mean, we're just starting to do this more and more. Not, we don't do it on all of them. Obviously, I'm not trying to totally over exaggerate this, but it's just because it's so easy. I mean, we're creating massing early on in a project, and now that we have that massing, well, let's make this context model, bring it in, do a wind analysis, a noise analysis, um, and there's another tool that we use called Climate Studio. It's an add-in for Rhino for doing annual daylight analysis. This is one tool that we use sort of instead of Autodesk Daylight Tool, which does use cloud credits. Autodesk, like Autodesk Insight and
Do,
Autodesk PV Tool and Forma do not use any cloud credits.
do you use Rhino a lot at Lake Flato?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say a lot, but we use it for all of our daylight analysis. But Climate Studio, it's a little misleading, but they have a Revit add-in that is really just an optimized export of the Revit model to get the Revit model into Rhino, where it'll flatten the glass, for example, to do the daylight analysis. And so here's a Climate Studio they also make Diva, which is a more of a grasshopper tool for daylight. They wrote this blog post about this middle school that we designed in New Mexico, and the main thing, which is the point I'm trying to make with Forma, is if you do this stuff early enough in the design process where you can make meaningful changes to the form of the building and where functions are, that's when it's most useful. If you're just if you've designed the building and now you want to just see what it looks like in a wind analysis, you might as well not even do it because if you can't change anything, why study it? And here you can see some classrooms that were being overlit and also a gymnasium. And by actually changing the design, you can see the shape of the building is a little different and changing the glass type. And also for the gymnasium, we added and moved around skylights until we got to 100% spatial daylight autonomy for a gymnasium in New Mexico, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So do you use Forma? Which phase do you use it the most? Is it always early phase, like you start doing all this wind solar, or do you also use it kind of somewhere in the middle of the process, or do you
Yeah,
bring in?
it
Yeah.
tends to be early on. It really has a lot of value early on in the project. Um, but with this embodied carbon workflow and some of the other tools that they're starting to add, I think it's giving it a little bit more trajectory into the project because I could see, this idea of what EHDD did when they started creating the tool. They're currently the architects for the AIA headquarters remodel in Washington, D.C. And they went into the interview for that job, which we've used Forma itself for interviews, but they went into the interview with their Epic tool that uses this embodied carbon estimator and came up with this number. We can achieve this number at the end of the project, this embodied carbon number. And and at the end of the project, they did a comparison and it was within 5%. But that's not to say that just at the end of the project they used one click LCA or tally and it magically lined up. That number that they got, out of what now that we could also get out of Forma was sort of their North Star or their guidepost throughout the project. They're making big decisions and they're coming back to, what these numbers were and some of these early decisions that were made in terms of the structure and whatnot.
I think if it's okay with you, like we should do the final giveaway that we've promised it since it's already
Yeah.
4:06 local time here. So do you
One
want to
one
talk
really
about? Yeah,
can I
yeah, go
make
ahead.
one in this embodied carbon thing?
Go
Notice
ahead.
that
Yeah.
the interiors has the most embodied carbon, which is not even something that we actually most of us study. We're mostly looking at the structure and the facade. And one reason for that is if you go into this database and click on interiors, the refurbishment period, right, for interiors,
Yeah.
chairs and desks. Maybe it's not 10 years. You could switch this to 20 and then maybe it's not the biggest anymore. But there's the embodied carbon of the interiors up, and the day the project open might not be the biggest thing, but over the life, over the 60 year, 30 or 60 years of the building might be. So anyways, yeah, let's switch to that last giveaway now, right?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Varus? I once had an
Yes.
episode about it, so I'm guessing some people are at least familiar with it.
Yeah, so Varus is pretty cool. It's another one of those AEC specific things that exist. So there's a lot of really cool like text to image generative AI tools like Midjourney and Dolly, and we use those also at Lake Flato. But Varus is an add-in for Revit, SketchUp, as you just saw, Forma, and it even is a standalone tool. And so on the right, you can see this Revit model of the residential project for one of my Revit textbooks that the students create. And then there's a button on the Evolve Lab tab in Revit. You click that button, this UI opens up. You click Compose, and then there's this geometry override. Well, this is a thing you designed, so you don't want it to change. You crank that all the way to 0, and then the materials, you could also have kind of light, and it's just going to make a really good, realistic version of the material that it does see. Even here, you can see it's like 60%, and it's still pretty close to the Revit model. It's just taking those materials and making them look hyper realistic. And then you can also type in a text prompt and even pick if it's aerial, there's some like a thing to support that it's aerial a little bit more with some additional text prompts that are added under the hood. And then you can pick 1 to 4 variations and it'll just continue to add all the options. And so when I just updated my Revit 2025 and AutoCAD 2025 textbooks, the Revit books, I used Barris to create the covers. And so I wrote a blog post about it. And Bill Allen over at Evolve Lab said for this show, he'd throw in a 1 year free license of Varus for somebody on the show.
Yeah, I had Bill and Ben on the show last fall, I think. So you can
Yeah,
check that replay if you're interested in learning more about Varus. So okay, let's do the raffle then. So this is open to anywhere if you're living anywhere in the world. This is not just for people living in North America. Let me just share the screen again. So let me just start a raffle.
do they have to type something different this time?
No, it type the same thing. I just need to start the giveaway. It's going to be 5 minutes, so we can close the show meanwhile. Okay, so type in raffle once again in the chat, not at the email, by the way. And then if you win, I will say your name. You will receive some sort of notification, and you can claim your prize by sending an email at this address. So yeah, type in !! raffle in the chat once again. So while that is going on, are there other things you wanted to showcase about Forma? I know you and so mentioned something about PV studies.
Yeah, so there is the ability, this is actually also somewhat newer, solar energy analysis. and this actually runs fairly quickly. And it's based on the same tool that we still tend to use, the one that's built into Revit more. It's a separate install. It's a little confusing because it's called Autodesk Insight, but the energy modeling Insight is just built into Revit. There's nothing to install. But the solar analysis tool, which I've written a blog post about on BIM chapters, Autodesk actually worked with NREL PV watts. So a lot of people who do PV analysis professionally, they can go to PV Watts website and they have to plug in the angle and the azimuth and the altitude and the area of the surface. Well, all of that comes directly from the Revit model, and then you only have to make sure your location on Earth is accurate and true north is accurate, and it'll give you a total PV analysis result. And then you can do the math on that and subtract that from your EUI, your operational energy. So here's the surface coverage area and the panel efficiency. These are also things that you can plug in Revit and in PV Watts. What's the efficiency of the panel? And this is a range of realistic options. 25% is actually pretty high, and a really poorly, if not very efficient one is 10%. So you can adjust this and it'll change the total energy that can be generated. But again, the reason that this isn't very accurate, then I mean it's helpful, but it's just like it's all the horizontal surface areas, obviously subtracting 40%, but you can see it did the top of that windbreaker wall, if there were any other surfaces that really weren't meant to have PV on them. What's kind of interesting is if we were to take this and move this down, right, this adjacent building is obviously going to block a lot of sun. I should have paid more attention to what the actual number was, but this is a pretty quick calculation. And so once we're done, the number will be quite a bit smaller because this building is blocking quite a bit of the sun at certain days and months. Whereas when this building was as tall as that building, it was never blocking it, right? And well, yeah, this noise analysis failed, which is interesting. You can see the AI version is still showing, like I mentioned, that only the two roads that I plugged the info in, and then it's listing the decibel levels. And because this is 50, an hour to 2 hours, the wind analysis is still going. But here's the microclimate data, which is actually pretty cool. So when I did a test run on this earlier this morning, like 2 hours ago, I wanted to go through a bunch of things I was going to talk about. Notice it says for April, right? We're in April. The average temperature is 78 degrees. And it was exactly 78 degrees, but right now it's 83 degrees. So, I mean, this is really helpful to understand the microclimate of the project. Notice it's listing some things like strong heat stress and moderate heat stress, the percentages. The humidity, 51%, that's quite high. But now check out August, when this turns into liquid lava. Strong heat stress, 7%, very strong heat stress, 93%, 40% humidity, cloud cover, 36%. So the wind data, because that's still calculating, isn't layered in here yet. But you can also, again, click on different areas. 107 degrees, but between the two buildings, or if we were to create some sort of shade structure, which is what we did on our office remodel. We have a shade structure in a courtyard with some 3 big ass fans that provide active cooling.
Cool. While you were explaining all of this, we've picked a winner from the
Nice.
for the Veris license, and it's Brendan Creasy. So Brendan Creasy, you can give me a sec. Claim the prize by sending in me an email at nick@bimpure.com, and I'll make sure that you get your license. And so far, I did receive an email from the previous 5 winners of the
Awesome.
3D Connection keyboard, so we're all set for that.
Cool. I'll pass that on to them, and they will ship it out directly to the 5 winners, and then I'll pass the email on to Evolve Lab, and Bill Allen will plug you into their system so that you can create an account and use Veris for a year for free.
All right, so we're kind of pretty much past the hour. So anything else you wanted to show, or any concluding thoughts?
No, I think hopefully it's all pretty self-explanatory. It's actually pretty easy to use. I think there's the great thing I saw Fenestra Pro mention that they were working on an add-in for Forma, which they do facade analysis, really more detailed and just focused on the facade. So I think I see a lot of really interesting opportunities to continue to use this and get, create better buildings, starting obviously with passive strategies, but then also is going to minimize any active strategies that are needed after that.
Yeah, and for someone that want to get started with Forma, sound today's presentation that looks pretty cool. What is the best way, or the best tutorial? Should they watch your entire series? So hopefully you've had enough to get started, but if they want like even more documentation about it.
Yeah, this recording, rewatching it will be helpful. I think the Forma YouTube playlist that I made is meant to really start from nothing and work through most of the big features. Even right here in Forma, there's actually these like learn more button. You click on it, and there's like great articles about where the data is coming from and how to interpret the results. There's the one on the daylight analysis where it talks about an NVIDIA process that it's using, but a lot of these have links to videos as well. So there's actually quite a bit of good information that's available right now, even though it's constantly changing. They've added, that embodied carbon, the board feature, just within the last 2 months, and then earlier this year they added the solar feature and the little generative AI thing was announced at Autodesk University.
Yeah, all pretty good stuff. I'll admit I played a little bit with it, but I didn't have time to do a deep dive into it. But the minute I have a little time, I want to play more with it. So let's conclude the show. A couple of things just before we close the session. Sorry, getting the wrong seats. Okay, bimpure.com/landscape. That's the mini course we've released last week with Nehama. That's at bimpure.com/landscape. Else the BIMpure membership that includes everything, all of our courses, live events, downloads, pro templates, store collection, family collections, the pamphlet, live events, and more. And constantly adding new content. That's bimpure.com to subscribe and get access to all of this. So then that was super interesting, and thanks for your generous giveaways. We've got all the winners set up. I'll make sure to transfer all the emails. So
sure, I was just the middleman, but I'm happy.
Yeah.
It was fun to be able to give some stuff away.
All right, thank you so much. And the next episode I'm going to announce, it's going to be late May. All right, so thanks Dan.
Bye.
And thanks everyone in the audience. See you all. Bye.